Ever feel like the real world is like holding you back? Like there's this invisible rule book for starting and running a business that everyone seems to know except you.
Yeah.
Well, today we're like tossing that rule book out the window.
Ah,
We're diving into the first chapter of Rework, a book that challenges almost everything you thought you knew about entrepreneurship.
you know what really struck me right away was the book's like audacity. It doesn't just offer gentle suggestions.
Right.
It throws down the gauntlet. The authors are basically saying, stop making excuses and start making something awesome.
Yeah, I felt that energy too. It's
I
almost like they're giving you permission to like break the mold,
Mhm.
and they start by tackling this idea of the real world, this supposed force that keeps us playing it safe.
Yeah, they argue that this real world is often just a collection of outdated assumptions and like fear-based limitations.
Okay.
It's the voice that says, you need a fancy office, or you have to work 80 hours a week to succeed.
But Rework flips the script, right? They use their own company as an example.
Huh.
They have a fully remote team, no salespeople, and they openly share their secrets to success. They're basically proving that you can defy the so-called real-world norms and still thrive.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful message for anyone who's ever felt limited by these like invisible barriers. It's about recognizing that the rules of the game are not set in stone. You have the power to redefine them.
Okay, so we're ditching the real-world excuse.
Right.
What's next on the chopping block?
Well, this one might surprise you. Rework argues that learning from your mistakes is overrated.
Wait, what? But haven't we always been told that mistakes are like valuable lessons?
The book makes the point that simply knowing what not to do
Right.
doesn't necessarily point you in the right direction. It's like trying to find your way out of a forest by remembering every wrong turn you've taken.
Okay.
You might avoid those dead ends,
Right.
but you still haven't found the path forward.
Okay, I'm starting to see their point.
Mm.
So if dwelling on mistakes isn't the answer, what should we be focusing on?
Rework emphasizes the importance of replicating your successes. They cite a Harvard Business School study that found entrepreneurs who had succeeded before had a much higher success rate with future companies.
Oh, wow.
In fact, their success rate was 34% compared to just 23% for those whose first companies had failed.
So success breeds success. That's interesting. It's almost like a confidence boost. If you've done it before, you're more likely to do it again.
Exactly. And I think that ties into a larger theme of Rework, which is about focusing on your strengths and building upon what you know works rather than getting bogged down in past failures.
All right, next up, we're tackling something that I know a lot of us struggle with, long-term planning. I'm a planner by nature, so I was intrigued by Rework's take on this.
The book doesn't completely dismiss planning. It acknowledges that having some sense of direction is important,
Yeah.
but they challenge the idea of creating these elaborate multi-year plans that try to predict the future with absolute certainty.
Right? Because let's face it, the future's anything but certain. So what do they suggest we do instead? Throw caution to the wind and just wing it?
Not exactly. They advocate for what they call business guesses.
Business guesses.
It's about acknowledging that our plans are really just educated guesses about what might happen.
Okay.
And the key is to be flexible and adaptable, ready to adjust our course as new information emerges.
So instead of clinging to a rigid plan that might become obsolete in a matter of months, we should be prepared to pivot and iterate as needed.
Precisely. And Rework argues that this flexibility is actually a competitive advantage, especially in today's rapidly changing world.
I can definitely relate to that. I've had countless meticulously crafted plans go completely off track because of unexpected circumstances.
Sure.
It makes you wonder if all that planning was really worth the effort.
That's a great point. And it leads us to another one of Rework's core principles, challenging the growth imperative.
You mean bigger isn't always better? That's a pretty radical concept in the business world, where growth is often seen as like the ultimate measure of success.
The authors argue that businesses like people have an optimal size,
Okay.
and that size might be much smaller than you think.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So how do we determine the right size for our business? What factors should we be considering?
Rework suggests that we think about our goals, our values, and our desired lifestyle. They even compare businesses to prestigious universities. We admire institutions like Harvard and Oxford for their quality and impact, not necessarily for their size.
That's a great analogy. It makes you realize that growth for the sake of growth might not be the best goal. Maybe staying smaller allows you to maintain a higher level of quality focus and flexibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about finding the sweet spot where you can create something truly valuable and sustainable without sacrificing your well-being in the process.
This is making me rethink my whole definition of success. Okay, ready to tackle another myth.
Bring it on.
All right, this one's a bit personal for me, and I'm sure it resonates with many of you as well. It's the glorification of the workaholic. We've all bought into the idea that long hours equal dedication and success.
I think Rework does a great job of exposing the fallacy of this myth.
Uh-huh.
They argue that workaholism often leads to burnout, diminished creativity, and ultimately less effective work.
There's a line in the book that really hit home for me. The real hero is already home because she figured out a faster way to get things done. It's a powerful reminder that efficiency and effectiveness should be the goals, not just racking up hours at the office.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message we all need to hear in today's always-on culture. It's about working smarter, not harder, and finding a sustainable way to achieve our goals without sacrificing our health and well-being.
It's a good reminder for all of us to assess our own work habits and make sure we're not confusing busyness with productivity. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dives, I have to ask about one final point that really caught my attention. Rework actually suggests that we retire the term entrepreneur altogether.
Yes, that's one of the book's most provocative assertions. The authors argue that the term entrepreneur has become loaded with baggage.
What kind of baggage are we talking about?
Well, they suggest that it can feel exclusive, intimidating, and even a bit elitist.
Yeah,
It conjures up images of high-flying CEOs and venture capitalists, not necessarily the everyday person with an idea.
I see their point.
Yeah.
It can feel like there's this exclusive club that you have to be invited into. So if not entrepreneur, then what?
They propose a simpler, more accessible term, starters.
Starters. I like that. It feels more inclusive and encouraging, like anyone can be a starter, regardless of their background or experience.
Exactly. The idea is to emphasize that anyone with an idea and the drive to act on it can be a starter. You don't need a fancy degree, a high risk tolerance, or even a ton of capital. You just need to start.
Does this reframing resonate with you? Do you see yourself as a potential starter, even if you've never considered yourself an entrepreneur? It definitely makes me rethink my own assumptions about who can start a business.
And that shift in perspective is exactly what Rework is all about. It's about empowering individuals to take action and create something meaningful regardless of their background or resources.
Well, I'm definitely feeling inspired. This first chapter of Rework has been packed with thought-provoking insights and unconventional wisdom. And we've only just scratched the surface. I'm eager to dive deeper into the book and see what other gems we can uncover. What do you say we take a little break and then come back to explore more of Rework's counterintuitive advice?
Sounds good to me. One of the things that Rework really hammers home is this idea of embracing constraints.
Right.
It might sound kind of counterintuitive,
Right.
but the authors argue that limitations can actually spark creativity and lead to more innovative solutions.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that in my own work. Sometimes when I have too many options or too much freedom,
Right.
I get paralyzed by indecision.
Yeah.
But when I have a clear set of constraints, I'm forced to get resourceful and think outside the box.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When we're forced to work within certain limitations, we often discover new and unexpected ways of doing things.
Rework also challenges the traditional notion of competition. They suggest that instead of obsessing over what your competitors are doing, you should focus on creating something truly remarkable that stands on its own.
They make a great point about how getting caught up in the competition can distract you from your own unique strengths and vision.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to outdo everyone else, they advocate for focusing on creating something so valuable and distinctive that it becomes its own category.
So it's not about trying to be better than the competition, but about being different, about finding your own niche and excelling in it.
Precisely. And Rework argues that this approach ultimately leads to more sustainable success. When you're creating something truly unique and valuable, you're less susceptible to the whims of the market or the actions of your competitors.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about building something that people genuinely want and need, rather than just trying to keep up with the Joneses. Now, another area where Rework offers some unconventional wisdom is in the realm of work-life balance. They seem to have a pretty strong stance against the always-on mentality that's so prevalent in today's culture.
I think their message about work-life balance is particularly relevant today when the lines between work and personal life have become increasingly blurred. They argue that constantly being plugged in can actually hinder productivity and creativity.
They suggest that we should be more intentional about disconnecting and giving ourselves time to recharge, right?
Yeah, exactly. They even go so far as to say that some of our best ideas come when we're not working. When we allow ourselves to step away from our desks and engage in other activities, our minds have a chance to wander, make new connections, and spark fresh insights.
I know I've definitely had those aha moments when I'm out for a walk or taking a shower, nowhere near my computer or my to-do list. It's like
Yes.
our brains need that downtime to process information and make those creative leaps.
And rework encourages us to cultivate those moments of downtime, to make space for activities that nourish our minds and souls. It's about recognizing that true productivity isn't just about how many hours we work, but about the quality of the work we produce.
This makes me think of something we discussed earlier, that whole idea of working smarter, not harder. It's
Mm.
not about grinding ourselves into the ground,
Mhm.
but about finding ways to work more efficiently and effectively so we can actually enjoy our lives outside of work.
Absolutely. And rework offers a lot of practical tips for doing just that. For example, they suggest setting clear boundaries between work time and personal time, batching similar tasks together to minimize distractions, and automating repetitive tasks whenever possible.
All great advice.
Yeah.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something that's essential to any successful business: building a strong culture. I was curious to see what Rework had to say about this, especially since they seem to challenge so many traditional business norms.
They definitely have a unique perspective on company culture. They argue that it's not about superficial perks like ping pong tables and free snacks,
Right.
but about creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work.
So it's about fostering a sense of shared purpose and creating a work environment that aligns with your company's values.
Exactly. And they emphasize that culture is something that needs to be actively cultivated and nurtured. It's not something that just happens organically.
What are some of the specific ways they suggest we can build a strong culture?
Well, they talk a lot about the importance of clear communication, transparency, and trust. They also stress the need to hire people who are a good fit for the company culture, even if they don't necessarily have all the traditional qualifications on paper.
So it's about looking beyond the resume and finding people who share your values and vision.
Precisely. They argue that skills can be taught, but it's much harder to change someone's core values and personality.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You'd have the most talented team in the world, but if they're not working towards a shared goal and if they don't feel valued and respected, it's going to be hard to achieve lasting success.
Absolutely. And Rework provides a lot of practical advice for creating that kind of positive and supportive work environment.
Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. The idea of scratching your own itch. This seems to be a core principle for the authors of Rework.
It's one of their most fundamental beliefs. They argue that the best products and services are often born out of a personal need or frustration.
Yeah.
When you're building something that you genuinely need or want yourself,
Uh-huh.
you have a much deeper understanding of the problem you're trying to solve and a stronger motivation to get it right.
It makes me think of all those successful businesses that started as side projects, born out of a founder's personal passion or frustration. They weren't chasing market trends, they were solving problems they cared about.
Exactly. And Rework encourages us all to tap into that same spirit of innovation and problem solving, whether we're starting a business, working on a side project, or simply trying to improve our own work.
Rework also seems to advocate for a more hands-on, action-oriented approach to business. They're not big fans of overthinking and analysis paralysis, are they?
Definitely not. They believe in the power of taking action, even if it means making mistakes along the way. They argue that it's better to launch something imperfect and iterate based on feedback than to get stuck in a cycle of endless planning and refinement.
So it's about embracing a more agile and iterative approach where learning and improvement are ongoing processes.
Precisely. They have this great phrase, done is better than perfect. And I think that's a powerful message for anyone who struggles with perfectionism or procrastination.
It's a reminder that we don't have to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect product to get started. We can start taking action today, even if it's in small steps.
Absolutely. And Rework provides a lot of practical tips for how to do just that. They encourage us to break down big goals into smaller, more manageable tasks, to focus on making incremental progress each day, and to celebrate our wins along the way.
All great advice. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground already, but I want to touch on one more key area before we wrap up this part of our deep dive. Rework seems to have a pretty strong stance on marketing and promotion.
They definitely challenge a lot of traditional marketing assumptions. For example, They're not big fans of advertising or relying on hype to generate buzz.
So what do they recommend we do instead?
They advocate for a more authentic and organic approach to marketing.
Okay.
They emphasize the importance of creating valuable content that genuinely helps your target audience, building relationships with influencers and thought leaders in your industry, and focusing on word-of-mouth marketing.
So it's about building a loyal following of customers or fans who believe in your mission and are eager to spread the word about your product or service.
Exactly. They argue that the best marketing is often not about selling at all, but about building trust and providing real value to your audience.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In today's world, people are bombarded with marketing messages from all directions. They can spot a sales pitch a mile away.
And they're much more likely to trust recommendations from people they know and respect, or from content that genuinely helps them solve a problem.
Rework really challenges us to rethink our approach to marketing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's about shifting from a transactional mindset to a relationship-building mindset.
absolutely. And I think that's a much more sustainable and fulfilling way to build a business.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive into rework has been eye-opening so far. We've challenged so many traditional business norms and explored some truly unconventional wisdom. And the best part is, we're just getting started. There's so much more to unpack in this book. All right, we're back, and I think ready to wrap up this deep dive into rework. This book has really challenged us to rethink so many conventional business ideas.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of unconventional wisdom.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes rework so refreshing. It's not afraid to question the status quo and offer a new perspective.
Exactly. And I think one of the most valuable takeaways from this book is the emphasis on action. It's not enough to just have great ideas. You have to actually put them into practice.
Yeah, they have this great saying, pick a fight.
Pick a fight.
What they mean by that is don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, to go against the grain, to stand up for what you believe in.
So it's about having a bit of a rebellious spirit, not being afraid to shake things up.
Exactly. And they argue that this willingness to challenge conventional wisdom is what separates the truly innovative companies from the rest.
It makes me think of all those successful businesses that started out as disruptors. They didn't follow the traditional rules, they made their own.
Precisely. And rework encourages us all to tap into that same spirit of innovation and disruption, whether we're starting a business or simply trying to improve our own work.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's one more point I want to touch on before we wrap up. Rework seems to have a pretty strong stance on the importance of building an audience.
Yeah, they definitely emphasize the importance of cultivating a loyal following of customers or fans who believe in your mission and are eager to support you.
Yeah, in today's world, it's not enough to just build a great product or service. You need to build a community around it.
Precisely. And Rework offers a lot of practical advice on how to do this, from creating valuable content to engaging with your audience on social media. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, and creating a sense of belonging.
And when you have a strong audience, you have a built-in support system for your business. They become your advocates, your ambassadors, and your most valuable source of feedback.
Absolutely. A loyal audience can be your greatest asset.
So Rework has given us a lot to think about and so many practical strategies to try. From scratching our own itch to underdoing the competition to building an audience, this book really challenges us to rethink the way we work and to create businesses that are both successful and fulfilling.
And remember, the most important takeaway is this. Don't be afraid to break the rules, to experiment, and to forge your own path. The world of work is changing rapidly, and those who are willing to adapt and innovate will thrive.
So if you could rewrite the rules of work, what would you change? What would your ideal work life look like? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if Rework has sparked some ideas for you, we encourage you to check out the full book. There's so much more to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rework. We hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as we have.